I've seen a lot over the years. Accidents, investigations, tragedies that shake the world, but nothing quite like this. From the moment the news broke, there was something different. The crash was sudden, violent, and terrifyingly precise. And the more I looked into it, the more I realized that this wasn't just a tragic malfunction. This was something far more chilling. At first, the reports were what you'd expect. An Air India aircraft had gone down. A mechanical issue, maybe weather, perhaps pilot error. That's always where people look first. But even early on, things didn't add up. The descent was too rapid, too clean in its destruction. There was barely a distress call, no standard communication, no time for panic, no time for reaction, just silence. And then fire. I remember staring at the flight path. The data stopped cold, like someone had pulled the plug. I've seen black box readings before, but this one stopped mid-thought. It was as if the plane had been shut down, not by nature, not by systems failure, but by something else, something intentional. And then came the voice recordings. That's when I felt the chill run down my spine. You can usually hear it in a pilot's voice, the stress, the confusion, the desperate calculations when something goes wrong. But here, it was too calm, too abrupt. And then nothing, like someone cut the sound just like they cut the controls. I've interviewed pilots, aviation experts, even former intelligence officers. I've looked into crash cases that were ruled accidents and later turned out to be sabotage. But this has all the fingerprints of something darker. That's why I said live on air that I've never seen anything like it. Because I haven't, not with this pattern, not with this precision. Some called it reckless, saying the murder on TV, but I stand by it. When all logical explanations fall short, when standard failure protocols don't apply, when black box data reads more like a cut than a malfunction, you have to ask the hard questions. You have to ask who would want this to happen and how far they were willing to go. We're not just talking about a crash. We're talking about an erasure, a complete shutdown in mid-air with no warning and no resistance. That doesn't happen by accident. And it doesn't happen without someone knowing exactly what they're doing. The worst part is thinking about the passengers, families, children, people going about their day, trusting the system, trusting that this machine, this crew, this flight path would get them safely to where they were going. They never knew. They never saw it coming. And for me, that's what hurts most. The violence of it wasn't just in the explosion, it was in the silence that came before. The illusion of safety before everything was taken from them. We owe it to them to dig deeper, to question harder. Because if this was murder, if this was an act planned and executed with chilling precision, then someone out there knows more. Someone made choices that led to innocent lives being stolen out of the sky. And we cannot rest until those choices are exposed. Investigators have a duty now, not just to read black box data, but to read between the lines. Every maintenance log, every crew record, every security scan needs to be torn apart. Because the truth isn't just buried in systems, it's buried in intentions. And intentions leave a trace, no matter how careful someone tries to be. I've been accused of dramatizing before, but this time I don't need to. The facts are dramatic enough. The suddenness, the silence, the unnatural stillness in the data. It all points in one direction. And if we don't face that direction, if we choose comfort over truth, we risk letting whoever did this walk away free. It's not about pointing fingers. It's about understanding what really happened. It's about refusing to settle for mechanical failure when every piece of evidence screams otherwise. It's about honoring those lost by refusing to let their story be reduced to a footnote in a crash report. When I said on air that I'd never seen anything like it, I meant it. But what scares me more is the idea that this might not be the last time. Because if someone can do this, shut down a plane mid-flight, erase a crew and all its passengers in seconds, and if no one holds them accountable, then it opens a door to more deaths, more silence, more pain. We have to close that door, and that starts by naming this for what it might be: not an accident, but an attack. Not a tragedy, but a crime. That's why I'm here. That's why I won't let this story fade. There's still so much we don't know. But we do know that answers won't come by looking away. They'll come by digging deeper, by refusing to accept easy conclusions, by listening to the silence and understanding what it's hiding. And if that makes some people uncomfortable, good, it should, because this is uncomfortable. It's horrifying. And it demands our full attention. I'm not done asking questions until every single one is answered. Not until the full truth comes out. Because these people didn't die in vain. And not if we refuse to let their story end here. I've listened to a lot of black box recordings in my time. Some tragic, some shocking, all of them unforgettable in their own way. But the data pulled from this one, it was different. From the moment I heard it, I knew we weren't dealing with a routine malfunction or even a tragic error. This was something else, something that felt intentional, calculated. And that realization hit me harder than I expected. When a plane goes down, the flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder are the two things that can speak for those who no longer can. They're the last whispers from the cockpit. They capture every technical blip, every word, every breath. That's why they're sacred. That's why they matter so much. And in this case, what they didn't say was just as chilling as what they did. At first, the data showed a textbook flight. Smooth, stable, no anomalies. That's what made the moment of failure so jarring. There was no gradual buildup, no system warnings that escalated. It was like flipping a switch. 1 second, the aircraft was fine. The next, it was falling out of the sky. It wasn't a stall. It wasn't a decompression. It was a complete, sudden loss of control, like the plane had been turned off from the inside. You can hear it in the voice recordings too. Or rather, what's missing? Usually, when something goes wrong, the cockpit erupts with motion. Pilots talking fast, calling out instruments, checking protocols. But this, there was barely anything, a few clipped words, some confused tone, then silence, no mayday, no panic, just gone. It doesn't make sense. Not unless something stopped them from reacting. I kept thinking, what kind of situation would silence trained professionals like that? What could take a fully functional jet and kill it in seconds without a struggle? I've seen enough to know that this kind of failure isn't mechanical. Machines don't usually die like that, but people can be silenced. Systems can be overridden, and voices can be cut off if someone wants them to be. There was one specific moment in the recording that made my skin crawl. It's hard to explain if you've never analyzed flight data before, but there's a rhythm to it. Altitude changes, control inputs, engine output. And suddenly, mid-flight, that rhythm just flatlined. No warning, no attempt to recover, like the plane had been hijacked by its own controls. That's when I knew this wasn't an accident. I've spoken to investigators, pilots, engineers. Quietly, they're saying the same thing, something doesn't add up. Systems designed with redundancy don't fail in unison without reason. A plane like that can fly with one engine, one control surface, one working channel. But here, everything failed together. And the voice recorder, almost eerie in how little it captured, suggests the pilots never had a chance. People always assume foul play has to look dramatic. A bomb, a hijacking, something loud and violent. But sometimes it's quiet, cold, precise. All it takes is someone who knows the systems well enough, who knows how to cut communication, how to simulate a system's failure that doesn't leave obvious fingerprints. That's what makes this so terrifying, because whoever did this, if someone did, knew exactly what they were doing. And yet, there's hesitation to call it what it looks like. We need more data, they say. We can't jump to conclusions. But I say, look at the data we already have. Look at what the plane was doing seconds before the crash. Look at what the pilots didn't say. That silence isn't natural. It's not what you hear in a mechanical emergency. It's what you hear when people are caught completely off guard, or when they're prevented from responding at all. The implications are massive. If this was deliberate, it means someone used a commercial aircraft as a weapon without a trace. It means the technology we trust with our lives can be exploited in a way we're barely prepared to acknowledge. It means this could happen again, easily, if we don't figure out exactly how and why. I've never seen such reluctance to confront a hard truth. But the families of those on board don't have the luxury of pretending this was just a freak accident. They deserve answers, real answers. And that starts with accepting what the black box is trying to tell us. Sometimes the loudest message is the one hidden in silence. This data is screaming at us in its own way. It's telling us that this wasn't natural. It's begging us to look deeper, to push past the comfortable narrative. And we owe it to every soul on that flight to listen, to really listen, to what those last seconds are trying to reveal. The hardest part for me, knowing that someone might have caused this and that they could still be out there. That this wasn't just fate or failure, but a decision. And if we don't face it head on, we're complicit in allowing it to happen again. So no, I've never heard anything like it. And I hope I never do again, but I won't forget it. I won't look away. Because when the black box speaks, you listen. And this one is warning us. The only question now is, are we brave enough to hear what it's really saying? I wasn't prepared to say it at first. The word felt too big, too serious, too dark. But after going through the evidence again and again, after listening to every second of the cockpit audio, reviewing the flight data, talking to experts behind closed doors, I had to face it. This might not have been an accident. This might have been murder. I've covered a lot of crashes over the years. Mechanical failures, pilot error, weather-related tragedies. And even those are devastating, there's usually a pattern, a chain of events that you can follow from the first mistake to the final impact. But not here. This one was different from the start. The numbers didn't match the timeline. The plane didn't descend. It dropped. The pilots didn't react. They vanished into silence. And everything about that pointed me in one direction. Someone did this. I remember sitting in the studio when the words first left my mouth. Are we looking at murder here? It wasn't planned. It just came out. And for a moment, there was silence on set, in the control room, even online. No one wanted to say it out loud, but it needed to be said because it's the question that keeps echoing through every unanswered part of this case. When you listen to the black box recordings, there's a moment just before everything cuts. That's deeply unsettling. It's not what you hear, it's what you don't. No warnings, no mayday, just nothing. A drop into total silence. That's not how trained pilots react in a crisis. And that's not how systems fail, unless someone made sure there wouldn't be time to react. You have to understand commercial aircraft don't just fall out of the sky. They're built to fly through storms, survive engine failures, even deal with onboard fires. But this plane didn't struggle. It didn't fight. It just stopped. Systems shut down almost simultaneously. The descent was fast, sharp, irreversible. It looked in every way like something had taken control. I asked an aviation analyst off camera, could this have been intentional? And I'll never forget the pause before he answered. He didn't want to say yes, but he didn't say no either. There are signs, he said. Things that don't make sense. That's the closest he could get without crossing the line publicly. But I could hear it in his voice. He knew. So what does that mean? If this was intentional, who would do it? And why? That's the terrifying part. We're not just talking about one rogue individual. We could be looking at something more coordinated. A planned act, a deliberate decision to take down a plane full of innocent people. And if that's true, it means there's someone out there right now who knows exactly what happened and is saying nothing. I know it's hard to believe. No one wants to think that a person could do something so calculated, so cold. But history has shown us it's possible. Planes have been taken down before, not just by terrorists, but by insiders, pilots who snap, technicians with access, people who know how to cover their tracks. It's rare, but it's not impossible. And ignoring that possibility because it's uncomfortable. That's how we let it happen again. I kept going back to one phrasing, the perfect crime at 30,000 feet. No witnesses, no survivors, only fragments of data and recordings that raise more questions than answers. If this was a murder, it was committed in the most horrifyingly efficient way possible. And the scariest part, the culprit might be walking free, might be watching the news like the rest of us, waiting to see if anyone figures it out. That's why I keep pushing the theory. Not because I want it to be true. I hope I'm wrong. I hope it turns out to be some obscure mechanical failure no one saw coming. But all signs say otherwise. And we owe it to the victims to follow the truth, no matter how dark it gets. Families are grieving, desperate for answers. They don't want theories, they want facts. And that's what we're fighting for, a full investigation, every line of data examined, every voice in that cockpit understood, every possibility, yes, even murder, put on the table, because anything less is a betrayal. I've received backlash, of course, people saying I'm sensationalizing, stirring panic. But the real panic is what happens when we pretend everything's fine, when we label deliberate acts as tragic accidents just to keep people calm. That's not journalism, that's avoidance. The truth matters even when it's ugly. If this was murder, then someone made a conscious choice to kill over 100 people, to destroy lives, families, futures. That's not something we can sweep under a technicality. That's something we can explain away with vague press releases and bureaucratic excuses. That's a crime. And it demands justice. So yes, I said it, and I'll keep saying it, because until someone proves otherwise, the theory stays on the table, not out of drama, but out of duty. The kind of duty you feel when you look at those passengers' faces, read their stories, and realize they were stolen, snatched from the sky by something more than bad luck. I won't stop asking. I won't stop digging. Not until every family gets the truth. Not until justice is done. Or at the very least, until the world has the courage to admit this wasn't just a crash. This might have been murder. From the moment I saw the preliminary crash data, something felt off. I've been around long enough to recognize when a tragedy doesn't follow the usual pattern. Planes don't just fall out of the sky. Not like this. Not without a trace of distress. Not without some attempt at recovery. The descent was too sharp, too sudden, and too silent. And that silence, on the radio, in the black box, in the data itself, it speaks volumes. That's why I keep saying etting investigators must explore sabotage. Fully. Honestly. Without flinching, I get it. No one wants to consider that someone might have brought that plane down on purpose. It's easier to blame a glitch, a storm, even pilot error. Anything but sabotage. Because once you open that door, you're no longer dealing with bad luck or broken parts. You're dealing with intent, with motive, with the possibility that someone knew exactly what they were doing when they caused the jet to go down. But if we shy away from that, we're not doing the job. We're not getting to the truth. I remember the first time I heard the cockpit audio. I was expecting confusion, panic, maybe even a last-ditch effort to regain control, but there was none of that. What I heard instead was eerie, controlled, like whatever happened too fast or too quietly for anyone in the cockpit to react. There wasn't even a proper mayday. That's not normal. Pilots are trained for chaos. They're trained to speak, to shout, to signal. Silence in this context is not normal. It's chilling. And then there's the flight data itself. Systems going offline in a specific sequence. Communications disrupted. Autopilot behavior that doesn't match standard failure modes. When you line it all up, it stops looking like coincidence and starts looking like design. Maybe that sounds dramatic, but sometimes the most uncomfortable answer is also the correct one. That's why I keep saying sabotage needs to be treated not as a last resort, but as a parallel line of investigation. Run it side by side with every other theory. Pull apart every inch of the plane's maintenance history. Trace every log into the onboard computer systems. Analyze crew behavior in the days leading up to the flight. Look at passenger manifests. Who was on board? Who had access? Who had motive? Because this wasn't just a random explosion in the sky. This was something more deliberate, more surgical. And if investigators ignore that possibility out of fear or politics or pressure, they're leaving the most important questions unanswered. I've spoken to people who've worked crash investigations for decades. They've seen the same signs I have. The hesitation to ask the hard questions. The tendency to default to mechanical explanations because they're easier to contain. But the best investigators, the ones who get results, are the ones who let the evidence speak. No matter how uncomfortable the story it tells. And here the evidence is whispering something we can't afford to ignore. Let me be clear, exploring sabotage doesn't mean we've decided someone did it. It just means we're not ruling it out before we've looked under every rock. It means we're treating every piece of evidence with the seriousness it deserves. It means we're not being naive about how vulnerable modern aircraft systems really are, how they can be tampered with, overridden, exploited. Because they can, and that possibility must be confronted. This isn't paranoia, it's responsibility. If sabotage is on the table, investigators need to move fast and without interference. Digital logs can be altered. Paper trails can disappear. Witnesses can forget or be silenced. Time is critical in cases like this. Every hour that passes without asking the hard questions is a window closing, a truth fading. The families deserve better than speculation. They deserve facts. Real answers. Not just we think or we're leaning toward. They deserve a full timeline, a full reconstruction, a full picture of what happened and why. And if that picture leads us to sabotage, so be it. The consequences are heavy, yes. But so is the weight of silence. I keep thinking about the passengers. Innocent people, people with lives and plans and families, they didn't sign up to be part of a cover-up. They didn't get on that plane thinking they'd become question marks in someone else's investigation. If someone caused that crash, whether from the cockpit or from the ground, the only way we honor those victims is by bringing that person or people to justice. And I know how these things go. Pressure from governments, pressure from corporations. No one wants a headline that screams sabotage. It's bad for business, bad for diplomacy. But it's even worse for truth. If we let fear dictate how deep we dig, then we've already failed. I'm not here to blame anyone prematurely. I'm here to say we can't afford to overlook sabotage just because it's inconvenient. Because if we do, if we dismiss the theory too early, We risk missing the one clue, the one pattern, the one confession that changes everything. So yes, this is personal, because I've looked into the eyes of too many families who were promised answers and got silence. I've covered too many stories that ended in, we may never know. And I refuse to accept that for this one. Investigators need to do what they were trained to do. Follow the facts no matter where they lead, and if that path towards sabotage, they need to walk it without hesitation. Because that's how truth is found, and that's how justice begins.